you know, knowing that there's more than just fucking McDonald's fast food meals and
crazy shit that's happened in genocide and stuff like that.
Still looked at as kind of dirt bags and outlaws.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
I'm gonna hit the burrito and all the fucking beans.
That's see, I still like the black beans. Just so you know, I did hit record. We'll go into the actual intro later, but sometimes I just hate missing this part. So Chipotle, good versus bad. I was doing the white rice because I got told white was better than wheat, which threw me off.
White was better than wheat? They have wheat rice?
I mean, brown than brown rice. Yeah, you didn't know they had wheat rice? Yeah, so I got told that it was better. I just tried different shit.
Why were you told that?
I don't know. People just like to say shit. I always like brown rice.
People do like to say shit.
They say shit a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like, there's a give and take to it. I've heard both sides.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even eat rice that often. It's kind of like if I haven't prepared something else, I'll eat it. But
sure.
Think about white rice, and I'll actually give you the history of white rice and why people eat it in Asian cultures is so before, like, the Industrial Revolution, or before it was easy to, like, mill rice down to refine it.
Okay.
Right? Like, the poor people, the peasants would eat, like, the wild or the brown rice because that was its natural state. Now, the thing is it's got way more nutrients that way. So it has all its fiber, it has all the vitamins and the minerals. Once you strip it down to the white, all it basically has is the starchy carbohydrates.
Right.
So it hits your system faster, which can spike your insulin, which for people that are diabetic or, you know, sensitive to insulin spikes, it's not real great for you. But anyway, like, the emperors or the rich people of Japan and China thought that white rice was more aesthetically pleasing, and it was super expensive to have it refined down to the white, but that sort of set them aside so they could eat this clean white looking rice. And the peasants were eating the more nutritious rice. But of course, back then they didn't know shit about science. So once it started becoming cheaper to process rice down to white rice, then the peasants started eating white rice also, because then they felt like it put them more on, it felt like it gave them something that they could indulge in that the rich or that the noble class indulged in. So that was kind of like where the prevalence of white rice came from. It's the same thing with, like, white flour. Like in Europe, only the rich people used to be able to afford, like, white bread and white cakes because it was very clean looking, you know?
Right.
Same reason they would eat with their fucking elbows off the table and white gloves, because it's very clean and proper.
Right.
But they were also, like, the royalty in England and the rich people were the ones that were starting to get, like, the first signs of these metabolic syndrome diseases that are now, you know, widespread in Western culture, where they were getting things like, you know, diabetes and getting sick, and they were getting obese because they were eating all this stuff that was stripped of its actual nutrients. So they're eating these things that were calorically dense, but had no real nutritional value to them. So
that's interesting. Is that why, like, people that come up from a grimy past and they get rich, they buy white Bentleys and wear white suits?
Yeah, right. It could be. That shit's clean, baby.
What's up, Floyd?
Right. Yeah.
I know a few other things like that I've heard, like the whole thing with ugly tomatoes and heirloom tomatoes versus what you see now with, like, beef stew tomatoes. Tomatoes were never round or red. They were always defunct and weird looking. And same thing, it was marketability. It was aesthetically pleasing to have them be symmetrical. And, you know, in I think it's Japan, they do those melons that are perfectly cylindrical. And the more perfectly rounded it is, I don't mean the ones that they put in the box and they do them by shape, but there's these melons that are extremely prized, and the more perfect they are, the higher it's like breeding.
You mean spherical?
Spherical? What did I say?
Cylindrical.
Cylindrical. Ah, damn it. I always get that tube in there.
All right.
Yeah, so the same thing. Like, they would, you know, mutate and genetically alter the fruits and vegetables to be appealing and sacrifice all the content.
Right. Yeah,
white bread, bugs won't eat.
Yeah, it's all that stuff is kind of changed up for aesthetic values, or, you know, even with a lot of farming, like you said, like, things are done a certain way so that bugs don't eat it, so that crops aren't destroyed, so that farmers can make more money. But, you know, then you're talking about pesticides and all this other shit that we get to ingest.
Well, and they say that like the pesticides are like, oh, it only attacks like bacteria and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, but we have bacteria in us. Like we rely on bacteria in our system and in our intestines to process foods and to digest and
That's very true.
to live. Like you can't live aseptically, and it's just a bad idea.
Right. Right.
And the counter to it is people starve to death even here in the United States. Like, so it's a catch, you know? So they're like, hell, how do we make all of this mass product and get it out to everybody? Because not every neighborhood and not every town, especially an impoverished town, can produce enough fruit and vegetable for that community.
Right. Well, that's the issue. And I mean, I've seen that, and being in nutrition for, over a decade as, an actual like nutrition coach, and then really being into it for about 15 years personally, I get it. But it's
Right.
it's not even a problem of nutrition. Now you're starting to get more into like society problems where we're talking about overpopulation and constant growth of population. Like there's no way we can actually sustain the world's population in a healthy manner. So the only way to feed everybody is to come up with these processed or these, these different types of foods, or even like this stuff that they're starting to grow in labs now.
Yep.
To come up with food systems. But, it's getting, sustenance into our system, but it's also creating more disease. It's allowing more population, and it's weakening us. So as the human, the human species is expanding, I feel like we're actually getting weaker and weaker. And, they've done some archaeological digs where they looked at like humans from 15,000 years ago that were hunter-gatherers compared to humans that lived there, 500 to 1,000 years ago on the exact same land that were more like farmers and in agriculture. And when they were hunter-gatherers, like they were an average of 6 inches taller. Their bones were stronger. They had no, like dental disease. There was, no signs of things like diabetes, anything like that. And then when you went into the agricultural aspect of 500 to 1,000 years ago, those people, they had, tons of cavities, tons of, bone density issues. Like I said, they were about 6 inches shorter on average. So the whole idea that, every generation man is getting bigger and bigger and bigger is not true. Like we're actually, I think, on a decline. And, it depends on the area. And, it's just one of those things where, what are you going to do about it?
Well, we brought up this conversation before, and these get really complicated because they can get into very emotional topics, and then you can get into like some crazy shit that's happened in genocide and stuff like that. But the idea of allowing everyone to live, everyone to procreate, things that used to wipe people out early on, natural selection, we now extend. And it gets real complicated, right? Like with medical situations. And say you have a child is born, child has unbelievable amount of problems. It's on life support for years and years. You're doing transplants, you're swapping out hearts, you're doing all of this stuff. And on one side, it's like, of course you would. That's my child. That's our future. You would do these things because how could you not, right? But then you just extend that ability for those genetic defects to get passed down. And it can very easily sound super heartless. It can really be taken a lot of bad ways, but what you're doing is passing that on down the line. I'm not saying we should be like the Spartans and, look at a baby and throw it over a cliff if it doesn't measure up, but there are things that you do that not only affect the future generations coming from that offspring, but drain from the resources of the family unit you had, where in nature that would never happen. A litter is born, you got 3 pups, the mothers, you got to keep moving, you got to keep going. One can't make it. It's not going to pass on. It's not going to live. The other ones can then go, survive, thrive, pass on the genes, etc. And it, it strengthens it. Just like they talk about in nature, like they talk about how grizzly bears and these other animals and elephants are getting smaller and smaller and smaller because the alpha males are being taken out. They're trophies. So they're wiping out the best of the stock that they had just to mount it on a fucking wall. Yeah. And then you're left with everything else.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's, not to get too deep into that, because, I mean, there's, part of the problem with this kind of stuff, like you said, is that even if you're talking from a philosophical standpoint, where if we're just discussing trains of thought, not necessarily what we stand for, people still get fucking butthurt. So rather than get into that PC realm, and which I think is overtaking our society as it is. That's the truth. And like
I didn't tell you I don't give a fuck on here.
No, I hear you. I'm the same way.
And it's about simply just lines of thought. These are just things you have to contemplate. And then you have to counter the opposite, which is those things are not going to happen.
Right.
So how, like with you doing nutrition work and training, and, you and I have had discussions on, psychology and mental preparedness for the things and enduring the things that are going on. I think that these forums, which I become addicted to, as you can see now that I have one that I'm actually attempting to go with, I think that this is really how you have to address those situations, right? Is like internally and culturally, and not just get force-fed the marketed propaganda that's going to be given to you that has an agenda. Like with foods, General Foods dominated what we thought food was and what your 3 meals a day had to be, all at a clever marketing way to not just get you to eat. My accountant went to Thailand and he was like, it's crazy in Thailand, man, you eat food morning, noon, and night. Whatever got cooked the night before was what you ate all 3 meals of the day. It's like they didn't have like this, this huge laundry list of like breakdowns of 30 different products you would have during the day.
Right.
So it was interesting. So yeah, man, these type of forums and having these discussions are important. And I'm glad to have you on today. For those of you that don't know Josh Ford, I've known Josh since
2001.
2001. Yeah, I was going to say 2001, 2002, right when I opened up Fat Cats in Ocala. We had met at a tattoo expo in Tampa.
Back in the micro pimp days.
Micro pimp days. Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I don't have any recollection of any of that stuff. But yeah, we all met down at the Tampa Tattoo Convention way back in the day. I had recently opened my studio, and I was trying to, figure out what I was going to do in the business. So we're all down at this tattoo convention, and I would go to this
is going.
Yeah, this is going to happen, right? These are those things. So we all go to this strip club, right? Because, we're young at the time. We're silly. We're kids. We're going out. This is back when I thought I could justify handing over money. And I love all my stripper friends, but this was at a time where I could justify giving over a day or a week's worth of income one night at a strip club. And I just don't have those luxuries anymore. So I go to this club, and it's me and a buddy of mine. We don't know anybody. And I see all these guys come in, right? It's like half a dozen dudes, most of which became friends after this night. I see them all go sit down in this area, and I go to the manager and I'm like, hey man, you see that group over there? I'm gonna go sit there. There's gonna be 8 of us. I want you to bring up 8 or 9 of your best girls, like just the coolest, the hottest girls you've got in here, and have everybody come up here. And I want a girl on either side of me, and I want one for everybody else in the room.
Like I said, micro pimp.
And I was like, let's just get 4 or 5 dances, like right out the gate. That's going to be my icebreaker. And so I walk up there, I sit down, everybody's like, what's up? And then like this squad comes in, and it had the desired effect. People, it was a good intro to everybody. And then the rest of the night was just crazy, and it was a great time. Those were amazing times. Those shows were, as everybody says, oh, when I started going, it was this other thing. No, it's just when you're young, you go in, it has an impact on you. You become nostalgic, and every generation thinks that their generation that experienced anything was better.
Of course,
so we did.
But we did.
What's that?
Of course, but we did.
Yeah, ours was way better. These kids are lame. Like, that shit was dope.
Sorry, kids, your conventions suck these days.
And there's some truth to that. They are few and far between. Far between. But when you have, 500 versus 50, the margins are going to be there. But that was back when Florida only had, as a consistent show, was South Florida with Sicko and Dave. And we just lost Dave this last year.
Right.
We had Bruce, which was the Tampa show. It's still trucking along.
With Radical Randy.
Fucking
world's best fucking mullet.
We all know where that story went.
Right.
And then we had Dina, who had the only all-female convention in Orlando, which at the time got a huge draw because there was only 3 shows in Florida. It was great. Now you have 3 shows in a county.
And because everybody was afraid of her.
Everybody was afraid of her. Yep. Dina Lippens. But so we met there, and we had some good times. And then Josh started doing guest spots at my shop. And Fat Cats in Ocala. It's still there. Brian Purdy still owns it. Sold it to my 9-year manager a few years back, and they are still killing. I mean, they're still running that shit. Everybody, most of the good shops in that town are still from that original crew of cats. So Josh is a tattooer that I met along that line. He's also a tattoo machine builder with Honorable Irons.
Not anymore.
What?
Not anymore. That was old. That was old business.
Oh, see, we didn't prep.
That was just Josh Ford Machines.
That was just Josh Ford Machines. Shit.
Just Josh Ford Machines now.
This is what happens when you do things like amateur life and just fucking get on the phone and start
No,
talking.
that's right. Yeah,
you had
Honorable Irons was when I had a business with another machine builder.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. That tends to happen.
Yep.
You've also owned shops.
Yep.
You had
Lifetime.
How many shops total?
I just own the one.
And you were partners in others.
I'll never own another shop.
You know, I had my 10 years owning a shop, and I have fond memories of it, and I'm glad now just to pass on my information and experiences to people.
Yeah, it's too much like fucking babysitting, man.
It is complex. It is complex. Absolutely. You are a trainer, an MMA fighter, a nutritionist, father, jack of all trades. You painted for a while.
Busy.
You stay busy. You
painted for a while. Had a single-digit handicap on the golf course.
Oh, that's right. You went after like serious play.
Yep.
Do you still golf?
A little bit. What I realized was that I love golf. And I fucking hate golfers. So it starts to get not as fun, you know?
Funny how that happens in a lot of things that we do.
Plus, you know, it's crazy. Like, I joined a country club, and here I think I'm going to be like the outcast that everybody's worried shit's going to go down with. You know, but I barely ever drink. Like, it's rare that I drink. You know, I take care of myself. I was out there, like, taking golf serious, and all these other guys I'm playing with are, like, fucking alcoholics running away from their, you know, jobs and their wives and kids to hide. And it was just like, what the fuck do I have in common with these guys? Like, I'm actually trying to improve my life and, you know, commit myself to something, and these guys are just being shitbags. So I'm good, you know?
Well, I had in Ocala, you know, we had a lot of country clubs there, and I knew a couple of the girls that worked the like 9th hole beer station out on the course
during the day when they weren't stripping at night.
Yeah, some of them. And the wives would be back in the country club, and they're out at the clubhouse, and they're out on this round, and these girls, which are basically glorified strippers, roll with these dudes, and they are out with them on the carts and doing all this crazy shit. Now, this is a real old boys club, you know what I mean? These are all the town's doctors, the council members, blah, 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 blah.
But the real upstanding members of society.
Yeah, all the upstanding members of society are out there on the thing, popping pills with these chicks and paying their rent, paying for their cars, paying for all of this stuff on the side. And then going back to the clubhouse and like waving goodbye to them with the wife in hand. Like the whole thing was just like scummy as shit. And all of them were politicians and everything else. Absolutely. So yeah, that was my experience with that. So
that makes sense.
Which of all of those trades are you still participating in at this time?
Well, I still have my machine business, which is kind of my main income right now. Tattooing, I only do usually like 1 to 2 appointments a week, 6 to 8 appointments a month. But I'm lucky. I work at a really good shop, Lucky Bird in Annapolis, and they give me free reign of my schedule. So I don't really have any set times. I just schedule appointments around what works for me, and I pick and choose what I want. So if somebody doesn't, I've been tattooing almost 22 years and my time's limited. So I tell people when I have a consultation, like my consultations these days aren't about me selling myself to the client. It's more about the client selling themselves and their idea to me. And it's not to be egotistical. It's just for the limited amount of time that I tattoo, and I don't even really need to sit down to pay my bills with tattooing anymore. I'm not going to sit down and do something I don't enjoy. So, so I still do a little bit of that, but then, I coach and, I teach Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and then I train some of the MMA fighters, and then I do a a lot of strength conditioning for the athletes. And then I have some regular clients as well. And I'm in the process of here probably in the next couple months, I'll have my own fitness and athletic development facility opened up. So I'm really, that's kind of, the last 15 years, I've really been working towards the nutrition and health side of things. And it's been sort of, kind of a side project, but it's gotten to the point now where I've educated myself and I've built up enough experience that I'm ready to kind of just hit that full time. So that's really what I'm working towards. And then I do, the nutrition coaching. I've got a ton of certifications for different strength and performance stuff for nutrition. I utilize a program now, which I really like for nutrition clients. So like with my athletes, like that's a different breed than like the normal person. Like athletes, I can just hand over a meal plan and they can follow it for the 2 or 3 months that they need to prep for their competition. And,
Sure.
And they're good, and I can do that with a regular client too. They can follow some for 2 or 3 months, but it's not really sustainable. So now with regular clients, I work more on a year-long program. We really take our time. It's more habit-based and almost a lot of psychology and mindset stuff where the online software I use, it allows people to be interactive every day. So like every day, Monday through Friday, they have lesson, lets them work through sort of where they're at nutritionally and even mindset around nutrition. And, like I said, every couple of weeks they get a new habit. So it's been really good because it also allows me to, if I want to, I can have daily feedback with all of my clients rather than before where I would have, once or twice a month, I would sit down or I would have like a Skype call with them. So it really allows me to stay in touch with those clients. So it's cool, man. It's just, moving on to a kind of different phase of my life, but it's something, like I said, that I've been working on for the last 15 years. So it just feels like it's the right time. And, I love tattooing. Like I said, it's been almost 22 years. I started tattooing when I was 19. It's taken me all over the world and it's opened up the opportunities for me to do all of these other things. But, on one hand, I can't put the same amount of time into it. So I feel like I've been sort of, I still feel like I do good tattoos, but I've been sort of on maintenance with my tattooing for the last few years. I haven't really improved as I see it. And so I want to make room for the people that really can devote their time to tattooing, because that's what the clients really deserve, is the people that can push the boundaries, not just keep them above water.
Right.
And I feel like for me, like I tend to do really good with the strength conditioning and the nutrition side of things. And I really feel for me that there's a big purpose in helping people live healthier lives, because like we were talking about earlier, that's sort of an issue with society, is people not being healthy. And so trying to create positive change in another person's life, it doesn't just affect them, it affects everybody around them. Like if I help a mother who has kids get healthier and she starts eating healthier, she might then trigger her husband to eat healthier, and then their kids are going to have a good example. So, and those kids are going to grow up, knowing that there's more than just fucking McDonald's fast food meals and all that kind of shit. So,
Yep.
it's my way of triggering more, ripples per se in society of positive change, so
Well,
it just
and
feels like it has more purpose.
Well, and to back that up, Josh is the guy that if you know him and he's talked to you about anything and you're at a tattoo convention or you're anywhere and Josh is there, you try and get your food and eat it before he shows up. He's going to come around the corner and look at you. Years ago, I went on this like crazy kick, right? Like I got in it. I was like headstrong into the game. I made all my foods. I shopped the perimeter of the grocery store. I mean, I just did it. I made my own peanut butter. I made my own applesauce. I ate nothing out of a can or a box, nothing. And a lot of what I had, been talking to Josh about over years and years and years, because he's one way, like he's this way when it comes to this stuff and this information, and he's constantly absorbing it. So he's constantly trying to pass that on to the people around him. I guess I could say you, right? You're here. Like I'm talking to you. I can describe you and like this
I suppose so. I suppose, yeah.
We could do this. So we were in Minneapolis, Minnesota, middle of the fucking winter. It was like -7 outside. And I went to the little booth and I got this thing of quinoa and like nuts and like had some grain stuff in it. And I remember I was like, look, I was able to find this. And you're like, oh, you're eating all those carbs. Like, what are you doing today? Are you doing cardio today? Or do you just need your like proteins and fats? And I was like, God damn it. And you weren't like on it, but you always had like that rational, side to it. So when I turned it around and started eating and working out this certain kind of way, I was able to hit you up and be like, dude, this is what I'm doing. I'm applying X, Y, and Z that, I knew from a kid and working out. And then all the things you had told me about nutrition, when to eat, what time to eat, which types of foods, when to have carbohydrates. It was you that backed up the idea that you don't actually not have to eat late at night. People stop eating at 6. They don't eat again until the next morning at 8. And you're going into catabolic shock, and that's actually terrible. So before you go to bed, eating something like a protein or, yogurt or whatever you're going to do that didn't have complex carbohydrates and all of that stuff was awesome. And it worked. And I shed like everything. Like I lost every ounce of fat on my body. And I spent 2 years eating like that. So it was awesome. And that's kind of your influence has always been that with people. People always know that about you. They're like, Josh fights, he tattoos. He's serious about nutrition. If you ever have any questions. So even before you decided to make this a profession, you were already doing this. So it made sense to do this and to have a job like this or to move in that direction. And that's one of the things about the business. And one of the reasons the podcast is called The Other Side of the Tattoo was one, because I got 22 years in this as well as, many different jobs and titles in the industry. So to start it from something unrelated didn't really make sense. And it was really to show this other side of things, right? If you're going to be a lifelong tattooer or whatever you are in your profession, awesome. Get it, kill it if that's you. But that's not really the normal formula. Like most people change careers like 7 times in a lifetime. That's like the average. And there seems to be in this industry and some other industries, this kind of like fear of the unknown. Like, okay, I got into something. I found acceptance in it. I thrived at it and that's it. And I am going to spend the rest of my life on it. And that's what I'm going to do. And if you're like if you're that Philadelphia Eddie mentality and you rock that shit out, but I mean, even Eddie, he had properties, he started companies, he started product lines, he did a ton of stuff, but so I'm not knocking the lifers at all. And I'm not knocking coming back around to it. But in our shop, one of the things I told everybody, any apprentice or any young tattooer or piercing that came in, I would always say, I'm so glad you eat and live this shit. And I love it. I love your passion. I love the way you interact with the clients. Get a hobby. Right. Get a hobby that has nothing to do with this, or else you're going to become boring. Right. And you're just not going to have as much dimension. And if you don't have those other activities and those other interests, you don't really have anything to bounce off your experience in something else that you can bring back over into your said trait, whatever you're doing. Yeah. That was always important, and it was always impressive, and it was cool to see it. I'm always inspired by people who are willing to build something and then just say, that's that chapter. I'm closing that door and I'm doing this next thing. Because that you're not owned by any of this. So it's cool that you found this way to do it like that. I think the way you're tattooing is very relevant. I said early on in a parking lot one time when I knew a lot, when I was meeting and learning about a lot of the stylized tattooers that are out there, I was like, you're like my favorite tattooer. I got tattooed by 3 different times, basically 3 different styles. Well, 2 of them are fairly similar. But I said about your style of work, I was always impressed with you because you would do a tattoo that somebody wanted, not that person was coming to get something you were going to do and it really didn't matter to them what it was. Yeah. Sometimes that happens with stylized tattooers. People don't give a shit what they're going to get. They're like, hey, I've got this amount of money. You've got this amount of time. Do whatever you want. Yeah. And that's fine, but I don't understand it really. So I think it's much more relevant to be technically sound in other styles to provide what the customer is actually looking for. Yeah. Because it really should be about the customer first. Yeah. Well, and I think, like I said, I mean, I've gotten to the point now where, the last few years I really have, I've been picking and choosing what I want to do, but I'm still giving the client what they want. I'm not, sitting down and being like, you're going to get what I fucking say. And that's all there is to it. It's more about like, hey, let's see if our visions combined and then we'll do something that we both enjoy. Right. But I think that's the difference between a lot of the kids that are coming into tattooing, say in the last like 5 years or so,
compared to like my generation of tattooers and especially the generation of tattooers before that is that, you know, like we had to put in work. We had to, you know, take the work where it was. And, you know, tattooing hadn't been built up the way it was. So, you know, we were still, you know, when I first started tattooing, we were still looked at as kind of dirt bags and outlaws. And I think I was kind of living my life that way at the time. But, you know, like I even, so I learned to tattoo in the first custom shop in Denver. Like it was Twisted Soul, and we sort of like set the pace in that town. Now that town is huge, you know, with custom tattooing. There's so many good tattooers there, and you know, so many bad ones also. But
always is.
You know, we still like we did everything, you know. And I remember like the guy, my boss, who taught me how to tattoo, is, you know, one of my best and oldest friends, Mike Nichols. You know, he was always telling us like, you need to be able to do everything that comes in the door, you know. And now I sort of agree with that, sort of don't to some extent, especially when we were in a custom shop and, you know, we were having to draw stuff that we necessarily weren't like comfortable drawing, when the tattoo artist next to us probably was more comfortable with it. But, you know, I did, like, I got to where, you know, I was tattooing everything. Like I was kind of more of like a new school kid back when it really was new school. I don't even know what it is now. Maybe I'm more middle school. I don't even do much of that anymore, but you know, it was like new school, or we would, you know, we were doing Sailor Jerry traditional stuff. And then we were doing tribal, you know, it was still all the fashion spiky tribal shit that everybody wanted. You know, doing script names. I mean, we did it all, but we were also still building our own needles and scrubbing our own tubes and shit. You know, but now it's like kids start tattooing and it's sort of like, well, this is my style and this is who I'm going to be. And, you know, there's a lot more, there's a lot of kids that come in that are picking it up faster and they're super talented, but they still, I feel like they still miss out on kind of that whole aspect of what tattooing is about, like you said, which is it's doing something for the customer. Now, you know, you have a lot of these younger kids where it's all about their artwork, which is cool. That's awesome. Like things are getting pressed, but like, you know, fucking like earn your place to do that, you know, like go work in a flash shop for a couple years, like learn how to be,
go to a bike fest,
ultra technical. Yeah. Just doing a bunch of flash, like just working on your technique. And that's like, I actually left where I learned to tattoo because I spent the first 3 years in that custom shop. So, you know, we had no flash. So it was drawing everything. And so it was tough because I was struggling to learn how to tattoo and struggling to learn how to like draw for tattoos. And, so I got married and I left and I went to work at a shop in Arkansas that was just, it was just a high traffic flash shop. I think in the 14 months that I worked at that shop, I think I did like 2 custom tattoos. Everything else was like cherry, you know, tons of Cherry Creek. And then, you know, old like JD Crow flash. And, man, I can't remember the one chick's name, like Gail something. I don't know, all these purple and blue butterflies and flowers.
You sure we're talking about Bolt?
Yeah. Well, there was some Bolt stuff in there too, but I, you know, like I think that was a little too progressive for Arkansas. You know, like I had been tattooing like 4 or 5 years when I moved to Arkansas, and I was like, you know, tattooing stuff that I think had passed before I even started tattooing in Denver. But you know, I'm glad I had that experience because it got to the point, you know, and then, you know, I've been through phases, you know, I went through phases where I was doing all new school, and I went through phases where I was doing tons of lettering. I went through phases where I was doing, you know, portraits. You know, it's kind of, I guess, just how my life is. Like if I want to do something, I really try and learn it. It's like now, like I got certified, you know, in the last couple of years for USA weightlifting, which is all really how to coach Olympic lifting. But I had done minimal Olympic lifting in my life. It was all like some basic stuff. So I hired a strength coach to teach me how to Olympic lift and started training to do like Olympic lifting competitions. I'm not even with the intention of doing the competitions, just so I actually got more of that firsthand experience so that I could pass it on rather than just saying like, well, I've gone through this.
Yeah, you're just reading it out of a book
and I know how to do it.
Application.
Yeah. So it was the same thing with tattooing. Was I just, you know, I sort of like delved into every little style, and eventually I found that I just really like traditional Japanese, and I like some traditional, and that's the majority of what I do now. It's probably 95% is, you know, traditional Japanese, and I don't do the like cookie cut Horiyoshi remix, you know. Like one of the best pieces of advice I think somebody gave me one time was, they said, if you want to do traditional Japanese style, that's cool, but at least make sure people know a cowboy did it, you know. So you know, I've kind of always tried to put a little bit of my own flair to it without,
Right.
you know, jumping outside the bounds too much. So,
Right.
you know,
Well, you know, and again, for anybody that may or may not be listening, who knows, there might be the only two that ever listen to this. This is not a bash as we slowly become the old people that gripe. It's not a bash. Everything is different for every generation.
sure.
Every one of them. The good old days didn't exist. Nostalgia clouds all memory. There's been studies more and more about that 90% of what you recall is incorrect.
Right.
9 people can have the same event happen, and it's completely different for all of them. And a trend that's happening lately is that they're finding that people that were not at an event, because we're so inundated with the experience in real time via all of the outlets for media and live cam and live feeds, that people are recalling being at events that they were never at.
Not at, yeah.
Like tragic events, like they were there and they were not. They just experienced it. And there's a part of the subconscious can't tell the difference because you're inundated with it. So this isn't to do that. We're not shitting on anything. Things were just different at different stages. And the thing that I think you miss out on with the way our shop was run, because, you know, we did have the apprentice level. The front station was the newest guy. The back station was the more seasoned, and he was almost always booked, and everybody else, like they paid their time in. The Jonathan Ulrich that one of our only real apprenticeships we did, he had to work the front counter for 1 year, doing everything in the front. He had to know everything about piercing. He had to know everything about tattoos, setups, blah, blah, blah. After 1 year showing that he was going to actually be at the shop, we then took the step, because we got asked every day, yo, I want to apprentice here. Every day you heard that. So you did make him work a little harder for it. It wasn't the abuse. He never had to like wash shit with a toothbrush, like clean the front.
I got shot. For
well,
real.
There's that.
I got shot.
All right, pause my story. How'd you get shot? That's worth a break.
Mike hates this story. So, I mean, luckily it was there was a wax load on a 22, but we had a friend that was a client, and he came in, and I was actually making needles. Again, something most people have no idea
What do you
about.
mean making needles? You mean open the cartridge pack?
Right. And yeah. And so I'm like, you know, intent making needles, and our friend had come in, and he had like a little like CIA like zip gun. You know, it was like a little pen that shot like a 22.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
spy guns.
he's showing it to Mike, and so Mike thinks he's fucking funny. And so he like sneaks up behind me, you know, and he's like 5 or 6 feet behind me, points this little fucking pen at me, doesn't think about the fact you can't really control the trajectory because there's no real fucking barrel on this thing. And so he's aiming at my pants is what he said. But all of a sudden I hear this bang. It sounds like a fucking loud firecracker, and something hits me in my back down on my side. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I reach back, and there's like a hole in my shirt and something melting into my fucking skin. And I'm like trying to dig it out, you know, it's this fucking hot wax load that just got shot out of this little fucking zip gun, hits me, and I turn around, I see in the mirror, Mike's like, ooh, you know, and he comes, you know, kind of running around the counter. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. I was like, get the fuck away from me, you know, like, freaking out, you know. So that was one of my favorite stories. Every time people, you know, bitch about like, oh man, these guys, you know, they fucking made me wear a dress. I'm like, motherfucker, I got shot.
You ain't got nothing on this, man.
I don't want to hear about it.
I got nothing on it.
Yeah.
But that's what you miss. That's what I think misses. Like some of the shops, I mean, and dude, the artwork that's being done today, it's mind blowing. Every month, people are hitting new levels of art that are fucking insane, and things are holding. Like some of this stuff isn't going to hold, but there's stuff that like was done in the last 5, 6, 7 years that everybody was like, that's not going to last. Shit's lasting. And so like there are some phenomenal things being done, and we know a lot of these people, unfortunately.
I think it's probably all the tight pants and the feelings and the extra estrogen. You know,
it is. It puts them more in touch with it all, right?
Treating is more sensitive. You know, that's why it's weird, man. Like,
well, and also you stand on the shoulders of those before you. You know, you got 9-year-old kids pulling off Tony Hawk's entire set. Right. You know what I mean? So like that is also a big, and the interconnection of social media, being able to actually see everything. You guys, I brought you guys to the shop because I knew that was a way for the artists in our shop to experience other art and do work together and develop and grow. That's now get on fucking Skype. Yeah. You could have a huge meeting and everybody draw with each other. And like, remember back in the day, you do like the art projects where you'd start a drawing or a painting and then mail it to somebody else. Yeah. And then they would collab and then it would keep going.
Yeah.
That was cool shit.
Now you just bounce shit off the iPad Pro, you know?
Oh my God. Yeah. And you can sync it. You can walk by each other and bump each other in Starbucks. And now you've got their whole catalog.
Right.
And not taking anything from it. But the other side of the community side, even though all shops eventually go their ways, everybody, you know, friendships come and go, and sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. But the memories in that, in Fat Cats, of the crazy shit that went on the daily. You know,
Right.
we were fortunate to be next to O'Malley's that had a fight night every Wednesday, which I can't believe that.
We used to go watch fucking Charles Crazy Horse
Oh my
Bennett knock people
God,
out before he was ever in MMA.
Right next to us. And then you see him in Japan talking
Right.
shit in the locker room, getting choked out. But like, you see this crazy bitch laying out in the middle of the thing. And we explained to people, that was him every day. And
Right.
Charles, or Crazy Horse, he would fight. They would grab him to fight. This dude's my height. He's like 5'5",
If that.
if that.
Yeah.
And like small, but crazy as fuck, gold grilled. And this fucker would start a fight, and he would be drinking a 40, and he would like hit a blunt and then like pass it off and then get in the ring and blow it out in the ring.
Right.
And this fucker would fight like this. But they would pull him when we'd have some loud ass shit talking bastard, some
Right.
big belligerent drunk son of a bitch. It was like, I want to fight the baddest dude in here and da 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 da, talking all kinds of shit, all 6'2", 6'4" of his ass, and they bring him in there,
Right.
and he would clean them up.
Yeah.
And then Charles too, with his dislocated arm that would always pop out, and he'd beat your ass with one arm while he tried to hold the other one in. And then those fights would spill out into the street every time. So the event wasn't inside. It was afterwards when everybody would come out onto the street and everybody was like drunk strong, you know,
Oh, yeah.
and just riot. And we just have the best times in there. And, you know, there was times we'd be in that place till 6, 7 in the morning. We'd have poker nights afterwards that lasted until dawn,
Right.
you know, and we would all get down like that. And that part of the nonsense side of the business, and not such a serious art experience. And I'm not taking away from the art. It's elevating because they're not as stupid as we are. And they're not blasting out at a strip club and losing their money playing poker and doing whatever, throwing rubber balls at each other's nuts in the middle of the shop, like during open hours.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like willingly doing these things. But that shit was fun. I mean, that's what I loved about the shop. The whole reason I sold it is once we moved to Orlando, when Steadfast started taking off, I was an absentee owner, and I didn't get the joy of and the fun and the crazy ass stories of being in my shop.
Right.
And that was when I fell out of it. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not built to be an absentee owner.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the things, man, you know, like tattoo shops are kind of tough to run as an absentee owner. Cause
They are.
Yeah. You're not in touch.
No.
You know? And that's the thing. Like, you know, with tattooing, it's a skill, it's a craft. So it's people like, you know, well, most people pouring their heart into what they're doing. And then if they feel like they're doing this for somebody that's not even around, you know, then it's easy to get start to feel like you're not appreciated. And, you know, whether you let go of your ego or not, you know, that stuff starts to wear on you. So, you know, that was a good choice to kind of let it go, you know?
It was, man. And it was, you know, it wasn't just for them. I knew that too. I knew that Brian needed to, you know, or somebody there needed to, Dan or Brian, somebody needed to take the shot because you needed somebody that was present. But also on a selfish level, like I was only getting the phone call at the end of the night, or I was getting the bad news. You know what I mean? You just get the bullshit at that part. You're a landlord, you know, you are. And there was no fun in that. And I know people that run multiple shops and they run it well and they have group sessions where everybody comes together. And I know that's possible, but for me, it just wasn't. So it was time to move on, try the next thing. Like we talked about before, not being afraid to let something go. Because it's hard. It's hard to let something go, especially when it's still doing well.
Yeah.
It's hard to be like.
That's what, you know, like, you know, moving into this more of the full-time coaching and the strength conditioning side of it, you know, like I'll make less money than I do tattooing, but I don't fucking care, you know? And some of my buddies are like, man, why are you quitting? Like you still have people that want to get tattooed by you. You're booked up. Like, I don't know, I'm ready for something different, you know? Like I just, I'm not afraid to step, you know, out of the realm and do something else, you know?
And you can go back. It's not like you cash in your card and you can never go back to it.
Right.
So that's another aspect is that, you know, being able to do those things and staying diverse. Do you remember the Sean Crowfoot story? Remember he worked for Little John? He was this guy
I know Sean well, but
Yeah, just for everybody else, he was this guy that was like he was ahead of his time at the time. The way he was playing in color saturation and his portraiture work, and then the geishas that he would do and stuff like that, he was doing stuff that was like really advanced for the time. He was doing stuff that I hadn't seen in other places. He's a very impressive artist to look at. And that guy would like disappear from tattooing and go restore furniture.
yeah, all of a
Like,
sudden he was making custom furniture, or he's
right.
doing something else, you know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's just opened another shop, so
Yeah. And he didn't
kind of
care.
bounces in and out. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I've done the same thing. Like when I was
Yeah.
fighting, like I was still tattooing when I was fighting, but I mean, it got to the point where I started doing these professional fights, and I was training like with the top team in Colorado. All my teammates were like UFC fighters, and we were linked up with a couple of the other big teams. So like I was, we'd have George St. Pierre come in and train with us, and we'd have all the guys from Jackson's come and train with us. And so I was taking it serious, and
Right.
it got to the point where I was like, I told the guys in my shop, I was like, all right, man, when I'm here, but I got to kind of throw my, all my eggs in this basket. Like if I'm actually going to step in the ring as a professional fighter, like I got to take that shit serious. And I did, for like, spent, 2-3 years really kind of like pushing that aspect of it. And then I was like, yeah, okay, I'm good. Like I'll just go back to tattooing now.
But once again, like because you in the realm of nutrition and the psychology of life and like mental preparation to be able to do stuff like that. I mean, all of those things that you do, I've talked to you when I went through rehab, like I did a long-term, year inpatient kind of facility, like a therapeutic community thing. And there was amazing people in there that were super well educated, knew everything. And they're right about their experiences and their perception of things. But it was the one particular guy, well, a couple of them, but one in particular that had been sober for 5 years, that had been in the system. And then when he got sober through the facility, went to school for doing that trade as a counselor, a professional counselor, and he was living it. So you were able to connect with him in a different way. And same thing with you having all of those, having the discipline to actually go physically fight. I mean, it's different. The mental preparedness of doing that is different. So when you're coming at somebody in nutrition or life coaching or anything like that, you get it. You get it at a real level, not just as an outside source. And I'm not knocking anybody that's just an educator. That's great. I mean, that information has to get passed on, and sometimes you may retain it better if you didn't get hit in the head a bunch. But you do have that aspect, which I think makes for a more well-rounded teacher.
Yeah, I mean, it helps to have that. That's the thing with me connecting with athletes. It's easy for me as a strength conditioning coach to tell my athletes, like, listen, we need to structure this so that you're getting good training, but also that we're not pushing you into overtraining and that you're getting good recovery. Right. And they listen to me because I've been on the flip side of it. So it's not like I'm just this college educated strength conditioning guy. Like I've been through it. So they're like, oh, okay, I'm listening to him because he's learned from his mistakes. And that's the same thing like with the life coaching stuff I do. Like I didn't think like life coaching sounds cool. I'm going to go take a course and call myself a life coach. Like, I just kind of fell into it because I was like the go-to guy that most of my friends came to when they had issues, and I was doing good at helping people figure things out. And now with some of my clients, like I tell them, with life coaching, I have, one guy, he's like, man, you're really good at connecting because it's not just telling me things or asking me to try things. You always relate it to things that you've been through. So it feels like that human connection aspect. And I said, it is like, if you want to talk about coming out of like drug and alcohol addiction, we can talk about that. You want to talk about coming through like an abusive childhood and how to come out on the good side of that? Like I can talk about that. You want to talk about going through a divorce? You want to talk about raising kids? You want to talk about having to be separated from your kids? Like, getting into different fields, put yourself into uncomfortable situations. Like I've had experience with all that. So I'm able to have that human connection side of it. And I actually have my sister-in-law. She just about 6 months ago graduated. She got her PhD. She has a dual PhD in psychology and theology. And I think she's more destined to be like a professor, like a college professor, because she's really good at the book smart side of it.
Sure.
But she's sorry, Ryan, if you ever listen to this, she struggles with like life stuff. So, super book smart, but she, has had issues. And I think she, like, sometimes like I went to a therapist for a while and the person just had no connection with the things I was going through. So everything that came out of their mouth sounded like bullshit.
Right.
And so I think that's where the benefit of like having real life experience and being able to apply it to other people, you know, it's a benefit. And then, like I said, then you kind of fall into certain things, just, you know, like becoming, you know, a nutritionist, strength and conditioning coach is something I was passionate about. And I was seeing that I was making changes in other people's lives. So I almost felt like if I didn't pursue that, I was kind of not doing what I should as a human being to help
Right.
further our species in a positive direction.
Right.
You know?
And, you know, it's interesting. And one of the reasons I wanted you to be a guest on, and I hope you're repeatedly, because there's other times where I just want to rant and talk shit. And I think it would be good to sound that off of. But that's kind of with me too, man. Out of everything that I've done, and all the careers and hats I've worn, if I think back to the most rewarding things we did as Steadfast was, without a doubt, was when we raised the money for the Boston bombing with Inked and with the Claddagh Fund and Dropkick Murphys. And it was just people I happened to know at the time from my life. And we got together, we made a shirt, we dropped it online. We raised like 23 grand in a day, drop in the bucket for what, you know, they needed and what happened and blah, blah, blah. But it was amazing because what we felt was able to manifest into something tangible and real and immediate.
Right.
And we were able to pull people together and give an outlet, right? Because some of the thing about charity and giving, and it's unfortunate that that's a dying art, or not art, but that's a dying trait of humans, especially our generation and younger. Like, charity is not factored into what we do. Like, a percentage of your income was allocated back out in prior generations, because that's what happens when you go through a Great Depression and you understand suffering and need, right? And then you have gratitude. But that moment there, and when I was in Phoenix House, I elevated through the ranks, right? There you start out as like a worker, and then you become like a manager, and then you become a department head, and then a coordinator. And eventually I got the title of guru, which is literally somebody who gets up in the morning and then manages themselves around the whole facility and just lets people talk to them. And just you repeat what you've experienced and you empathize with them. And that was the best thing. So I wanted to do this because I know some incredible people and I've had some awesome experiences. And there's still a ton of things about life that completely blow my mind and I can't process. And those mantras, man, you can't keep it unless you give it away. You teach best that which you most need to learn. Like, that's me in a nutshell. Whenever anybody's like, I say something like, you know, prophetic or like something that really resonates with them or it sounds transcending, I'm hearing it in my own head going, holy shit, that's what I'm dealing with at this moment. And this person just came along at the right time for me to interact with them.
Sure.
A term I heard recently on a podcast I was listening to was consciousness inequality. And that like really hit with me. Cause, you know, I've told you before, like, when we've talked, like I hit you up during this election cycle, right? And I was like, yo, man, I feel this, because I was saturated with it, right? And I was like, I'm feeling this. And you kind of broke it down and you were saying like, look, I've made peace with life and death, and like there's things that you can affect and certain things you can't. And you just broke it down with me. And while you're talking, I'm hearing my more rational level self, right? And the part of me that gets those things and that understands those and that can comprehend like releasing those fears and those that control complex, and it just resonated. And I was like, yeah, man, where did that go? And then I remember that that's the human condition. We have these amazing epiphanies and have these amazing realizations, and then because we're human, we forget it.
Sure.
We go right back to stupid.
Yeah.
It's like some of the people caught up in this madness in my own ego and perception of what's the wrong side of things that they stand on. Intelligent, compassionate, caring people. I know where they're at. I know that they feel detached. I know that they feel frustrated, and they're just caught up in an outlet. They're caught up in a mob kind of like outlet, right?
Sure.
So I feel that these type of things, the way you've moved your life towards the things that you're working towards doing now, is the same thing for me. Like, I need to get on the air. I need to hit up my friends and people that I don't know and talk about subjects. Just talk this shit out. You know, and if I can do something like this with you, and you can, you know, let people know what you're about and that you're another source with a more, you know, an actual professional source to be able to do those things, all the better.
Yeah.
You know, because we're at that, you know, we always talk about that ebb and flow, that there is always that fine level that the world operates on and that we operate on between failure, success, positive, negative, etc. And at any time that things seem chaotic, the other side of it's right there. all the great and the good and the amazing things we're discovering in our exploration of the universe. And, you know, while there are bad things happening in the population, there are also tremendous things happening in the population. It's exploding. People are living longer in certain environments and in certain ways because people are aware of the positive things in life. And it's always going to be that balance, right?
Yeah.
So that was my motivation for this and why I was really interested in where you were taking it. And I don't think there's coincidences in that.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And if you can transfer that on to people and make a living at it at the same time, I mean, shit.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the thing is, you know, what's funny is what I've learned is that, you know, like with the life coaching stuff and even with the training stuff, you know, I've done it, you know, for free for a lot of people because I really wanted to just help out. But what I realized is, and part of it is just our culture, is that if there's no value to something,
Right.
then like if you don't put value to it, then other people don't put value to it. So they don't stick to it. So I realized like once I actually started charging people for life coaching, all of a sudden I started seeing more changes happening, you know, because people actually like it felt like they had something that they would lose if they didn't stick to it. You know, even the same with like the fighters. Like I have guys now that I charge a monthly fee to do their strength conditioning. And, you know, and I did sort of like a little experiment where I had some of the guys that I didn't charge and I had the guys that I did charge, and the guys that I did charge were the ones that were sticking to their programs. And they were the ones that were following through with, you know, the daily things I asked them to do, or the daily check-ins, or like some of the, you know, technology I use to monitor sort of like, you know, athletes' readiness.
Right. I did that.
You know, so
I did that recently. I called you recently and was like, you didn't even call me about it. I hit you up and I was like, because Josh had given me, you know, some advice, and you'd written up a few different months of planning and, you know, different workouts, and I was doing them. But because you just hooked me up, because I didn't pay for it, I felt guilt and pressure when I didn't do it. And I was like, fuck, it really messed with me. Where if I had bought it, you know, and paid into it, I could have been like, I'm cheating myself, but I'm going to get at it tomorrow because I don't want him disappointed, and we've got this relationship. And I hit you up and let you know, I was like, dude, like I want to come back to you when I'm mentally ready and ready to actually buy a program with you. And it's not about buying the program. It's about like buying into the thing. It's no different than having a gym membership. It's no different than how you shop at the store. It's no different than your supplements. Like you can buy all of these tools and you can have all of these things at your disposal. But if you don't have somebody to help you align it and to orchestrate it, a lot of it can go to waste. A lot of people throw away a lot of good product, a lot of good foods, a lot of good stuff. I catch myself right now. I'm doing this farm to table kind of program here in downtown Philly, where in Lancaster, PA, which is just outside of town, there's all these farms, food, vegetables, fruits, meat, everything. It's all done, you know, fairly organically, whatever. It's local. Better to eat local anytime. And you pay $14 a week and you get 4 vegetables and a fruit in a box the next week. You don't even get to know what it is. It's whatever was right. So I've gotten everything. I've gotten like bok choy, I've gotten arugula, I've gotten beets, I've gotten purple carrots, all this crazy stuff that I don't normally buy. But I ran into a problem because some of this, I don't know how to cook turnips. Like I've never cooked turnips. So they ended up going to waste. And so I found myself where I was into it for a minute because I was like, cool, I'm getting this. They
have this thing called Google. You can type stuff into it.
I know. And that's how I cooked all the stuff I did cook. I made parsnip fries with thyme on them, like baked, you know, fries. Like I made some cool shit, but it was like overwhelming. Cause like, you know, when you get fresh vegetables, especially ones that don't come through the market, like I don't give a damn, man. Even the best grocery stores, the fruits and vegetables in those stores last a hell of a lot longer than ones you get from an actual local farm. And that's scary as shit. Because that's telling you what's real.
Well, it depends too. Sometimes, I mean, it depends. You might get some stuff that's organic that'll actually like keep growing and changing. Like if you take, say, like an organic potato or an organic carrot compared to like a conventional carrot or potato, they'll actually last longer, but they keep growing shit on them. So they're still growing like life and bumps and like more shit on them.
Nice.
And, but yeah, I hear what you're saying, man. My wife and I do something very similar. Like we do almost all of our shopping now there's a little local company called Bear's Honey Pot. and they're a local CSA. So they work with all the local farmers in the area. And so it's the same thing, everything's seasonal. So every week we get on there and we just pick like, you know, the organic CSA bag. And so it'll be a mix of fruits and vegetables, and you just kind of get what they get,
Yeah.
you know, and then all the, you know, we actually get the majority of our meats now from a company online that ships to us, but it's all organic grass-fed beef. It's all humanely raised pork and chicken and stuff. So it's,
I think I've heard about that. I think I recently listened to a program where they talked about that.
Yeah. So the company we use is actually called Butcher Box.
It is that.
And,
That's exactly what I heard about.
Yeah. So we like it because it's the same thing. Like, you don't know what you're getting until they send you the box, and then they send you a list. Like, here's what it is. But, you know, my wife and I, we both like to cook, and she really likes to get creative. So she likes the fact that we can still, you know, have very healthy elements, but we get to kind of play around with different things. You know, some people are good with it. Some people aren't.
Well, that's what I liked about it. It forces me to make other foods that I wouldn't normally make. And I really like that. I just, you know, I never made leeks at home. You know, I get like green onions and stuff like that, but I never got leeks. I made leeks. I would chop that up in my omelets in the morning, and it was awesome, you know?
Yeah.
And I did like roasted ones, and I do a lot of roasting.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff and let it roast.
Yeah.
And bake
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really fry a lot of stuff. I just do my omelets and stuff like that. So it was cool. And, I think that I want to keep it up, but I'm going to do it every other week. And anything that I'm not sure of, like I got like 2 bags of these purple carrots, I'm going to, you know, shave it down and throw it in the freezer. You know what I mean? When I get it, if it's something, it's so many, it was like 30, you know, purple carrots. Fuck, I'm going to do 30 purple carrots, right? But you know, I want to stick at it. But the great thing too is you get like the organic eggs for like $2.65 a dozen, which that's dirt cheap.
We don't get them that cheap, but yeah.
Local honey, $5 a pound. You can get pork chops. You can get all this stuff. So I think those programs are awesome. I think anybody looking into that should definitely look for that local stuff, because it'd be interesting as a nutritionist to ask you. They say that one of the reasons, you know, that there is one of the benefits to society has been the transfer of foods, right? The fact that you can get stuff from Costa Rica. I can have a banana, you know, in Philly. So there's some benefit to that. But that goes in direct opposition to the idea that you should consume foods within like the 100-mile radius for the antibodies, for the local things, and to the line of thought that you shouldn't really be eating foods that are grown out of season. Yeah. But does that apply if it's grown indoor, or if it's grown, you know, in a different?
Yeah. I mean, if it's grown in, that's the thing, is if it's grown in a different climate, you know, like it's natural for the bananas to be grown, you know, in Costa Rica at that time, or even, you know, I think they can grow year round, you know?
Yeah, they grow all the time.
By the way, Costa Rica is one of the most amazing fucking places in the world. But
absolutely.
It's, you know, that's part of it for us, is that we like to, we just like to keep it local for one. So then we know we are getting like fresh vegetables. We know there's less shit that's gone into preserving them. Mm-hmm. But then just, you know, supporting the hardworking farmers that are around us. And even, you know, you're getting a lot of these little boutique farmers now that, you know, these people that just, they're not these mega farms, and they grow and they show up to like these farmers markets, and then they sell to like these CSAs. So, you know, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, just dealing with your immediate community. So if everybody's kind of doing that, they're sort of keeping their little environment healthy, you know, and that's one of the things that I think is missing overall in our culture, is that whole sense of like tribal community. Mm-hmm. And if you really want to, I mean, really get deeper with that, there's a lot that goes into that. I actually think that a lot of the reason there's so much like mental illness and depression and anxiety is because we're still hardwired for tribal life. And if anybody ever wants to read about this, there's a great book called Tribe, written by Sebastian Junger, which is an amazing read. But it's you know,
second time I've heard about that book.
Yeah, so it's a great book. I actually think everybody should read it. But it's you know, they use a lot of references and different research that like psychologists have done now, and they've shown that you know, we're still wired to be part of a tribe. We're not wired to be part of this, you know, 8 billion people on this planet. We're still meant to sort of like have a place. And if you think about it in tribal society, like everybody, like they were sort of allotted the space that they were meant for. Like if you had a ton of energy and you were kind of all over the place, you were probably a scout. They like sent you out to be a scout or to be a runner, to, you know, transfer information between tribes. You know, if you were a wise person, you ended up becoming an elder or a chief. If you were a tough son of a bitch, you became a warrior, you know? You know, if you were a punk, then you were probably just, you know, either left by the wayside or you know, farmed in the fields. But not to say that farming is easy for any of you that are listening, but
They're just getting rid of people.
But it's the thing, like you just fell into where you belong. And it's like, that's not really how it is now. Like we're told like, you know, you've got to do good in school. You've got to go to college. You've got to find a career. You've got to do this. You got to do that. But even a lot of careers that people find, they don't necessarily have like, they don't have any like anything real that resonates with that person. They're just getting a paycheck and doing something they have like an intellectual affinity for. But it doesn't necessarily make people feel like they belong. So people get depressed, they get upset, you know, and they've even, you know, a lot of what they found is you look at, you know, for example, take kids that are sort of like, you know, troublemakers as teenagers, and maybe they get in trouble, and then their option is you either go to prison or you go to the military. Yep. And then they go in the military, and all of a sudden they become like the best, you know, like soldier. They're great for you know, their unit. And it's because they didn't know where they belonged before. So then you give them a purpose, and not just a purpose, but you give them people that rely on them and people that they rely on. And they know it's this life and death situation. If we're not there for each other, then we all crumble. Right. So then it's sort of like, now they're good. And then they come back from the military, and then shit starts to go haywire again. And before, they used to think that like PTSD was just like this because of all the shit kids were seeing in war. They were going over seeing their buddies get their heads blown off, or they were seeing body parts from bombs. And of course that's traumatizing. But what they realize is that's not just the main reason for PTSD. They're finding that they're taking these people now who have this sense of community and the sense of purpose, and then you rip them from it,
stripping it away.
And then you put them back in our culture.
Right.
And now all of a sudden they're like, oh fuck, where do I belong again? I just need to get a job and pay some bills. But that's not what I'm used to. And they get fucking depressed, and shit gets crazy. And, you know, and it's that whole, like, it's even like that mindset is kind of what I want to do with my, you know, fitness facility. Is I want to create sort of this thriving environment. So my wife and I, you know, we're back and forth with names, and, you know, we talk about this stuff a lot. And so I came up with Thrive Performance Center, because I wanted it to be not just the idea of like you come in and you work out and you leave. And we're not going to have any like open memberships. Like you don't just come in and work out. Like you're either going to come in for one-on-one personal training, small group training, or it'll be like group classes. So everything is sort of supervised, but it also allows me to kind of pick and choose the people that are going to be there, because I want everybody to kind of motivate each other. So whether it's like the 400-pound guy who's trying to get in shape, working out next to, you know, with another trainer, you got a guy who's a professional UFC fighter. I still want to see that UFC fighter going over and like high-fiving that guy who's trying to get in shape and motivate him, because then again, now everybody's finding their place. So it's not just, it's sort of like my own little experiment to not just create this like physically strong place, but also this physically, this mentally, this spiritually strong place, so that when people come in there, they feel like they belong. And when they leave, it's not just like, man, I had a great workout. It's like, man, what, you know, like I love coming here. Like I always feel like I get something, you know, not just for my body, but for my brain when I leave. And you know, I even want to incorporate like some of the life coaching elements where I do, you know, maybe a couple times a week, I do like motivational groups where I'll pick a topic like fear or communication or whatever. And I have like a little 10 to 15 minute talk about it, and then open it up roundtable style for everybody to kind of bounce ideas off of. So you have some people that are going to be a little unsure of the topic, and then some people are going to have gone through more of it, and they're going to be able to share. And so it allows this whole strength of community. And so going back to kind of like what we were talking about with the crop share type stuff, I mean, that's sort of part of it, is just, you know, letting that community thrive so that everybody kind of has a purpose. And, you know, it sort of feels like that's the mindset of where a lot of people are going. I think a lot of the younger generation, while fucking entitled for some reason, are still, they're still starting to realize they need to search out something that has purpose, right, and has some meaning, rather than just get the fucking job and get the paycheck, you know?
Well, and that's supposed to be, that's the gap, right? Like when you try to talk about this stuff, people that are not realizing they're programmed to think this way will start to say, oh, that's communism or that's socialism or blah, blah, blah. And they'll go to that direction. But actually, that should be the entire purpose of technological advancement. Like people talk about these arbitrary things like, oh, we're going to get jobs back into the U.S. First of all, everybody that wants a job, for the most part, has a job. Our unemployment rate has been on a steady decline. People basically work. Are some people underpaid or some people underwork? Absolutely. But this idea that like the only thing that can satisfy life is having that job, working those 40 hours, having that mortgage, having all of those things is ridiculous. And it's not going to get any better. There's never going to be more jobs in the automotive. Even the coal mine bullshit thing, which coal is out, it will be moved to green energy. It's not a choice. We have to do it. The natural resources are running out. You can't create more of it. It will happen with or without government because industry is going to push that forward. But even if everything went back to coal today, robots took away the jobs, not the reduction of that. Like cars, you don't need 5,000 people to build a car anymore. Detroit can never be Detroit because you don't need that many people to do it. You don't have one guy turning a wrench. You got a robot, you got a tech that's supervising that robot building half that car. So to try and like fight backwards at the same time that you progress, so it's like using an iPhone to say that we never went into space. You know what I mean? It's like you can't use the technologies that you have to refute the technologies that you enjoy. You got to get away. Well, one of the lines of thinking is you got to get away from this idea that everybody has to have this antiquated form of income and this what they put their energies into. It's really just a way to keep people really in line, because most people that have to work 40, 60, 80 hours a week just to survive, they have no time for anything else. There's no time for thinking. There's no time for processing. There's no time for any of that stuff. And those are the type of things that technology helped. Once there was pipes running into your house that would bring you fresh, clean water, you didn't have to spend half your day trekking to some fresh, clean water to carry a bucket back and do that. That's the difference. So like you were able to like, okay, sit back. Now I can read a book. Now I can become educated in this. I can actually go to school. I can take a class. And that's really where things have to eventually go, is not this attempt to go back to some good old days that were never good for everybody, only for a particular group, and try and regress. You've got to figure out a way to make these technologies that are inevitable. They are coming. They're not going to stop. You know, drones look at Amazon, what it's done to retail. Amazon has now bought Whole Foods. That's happening. Walmart is in line to compete with Amazon, and if not surpass Amazon. Those are some of their own projections. I
don't think so. I think Amazon is going to keep crushing Walmart. Plus, I agree. I kind of have the inside track through, a little bit of like what my wife does, and I think what's going to happen to Walmart is going to be what happened to Blockbuster, because Blockbuster thought Netflix was a stupid idea. You know what's funny is Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix, and they were like, nope, that's never going to work. And then they were like, oh, fuck, we're going out of business. And then they were like, they were too late to the party. Because
they also had the opportunity to buy Redbox, which had its moment in time. But Redbox shut Blockbuster down. Like, even we did that. We were like, oh, look, Redbox is right there. Now you wouldn't do anything if you download and stream everything.
That's like, Walmart's trying to do what Amazon's doing, but Amazon's they're already doing it right. So every time Walmart tries to catch up to them, Amazon's going to be like another step ahead.
I agree with that, but it doesn't stop Pepsi and Coca-Cola from existing. And if you look at like the iPhone and Android market, I mean, at one time, iPhone was the innovator, but when Steve Jobs passed, really a lot of that appeal lost. They lost a lot of their direction. They're still massive. They're still one of the biggest companies in the world, but the Android platform to a lot of people is superior in their own ways.
So there's always going to be that. There's always going to be that. Everybody's got what they like. It's the same thing with Macs and PCs, right? Some people hate Macs, some people love PCs, or vice versa. And there's always that. But I mean, I think that's a little bit different. Like you're talking about the Android and the iPhone. That's a little different than like Amazon and Walmart. You know what I mean?
Walmart is trying to become an e-commerce giant, and they're not caught up, but they are growing their e-commerce, I believe, faster than their retail. And there's always going to be that. See, Walmart's got that finger on that pulse of the parts of the country and the world that don't get into that, right? Like in e-commerce, there are countries that we never sold anything to. They just don't operate that way. They don't order things that way. You know what I mean? They're not that kind of shopper. And I feel like with Walmart, they've really got a pulse on that middle America kind of environment where you're going to be able to appeal to that population that isn't going to be as savvy and, you know, necessarily want to buy or have the distribution. I mean, it's hard to distribute to some of those areas in the same way that a drone is going to be able to bring you something within the hour in a major city. But the point of all of that was those things are coming regardless.
Sure. Yeah.
So figuring out what to do with that time and that energy, that manpower that you have, not to go all crazy sci-fi, but that was what the premise of Star Trek was, right? That once we realized there was, you know, other beings in space, the whole planet started building these spaceships, and not for individual gain, but it became this collective to then explore and see what else was out there. And that can happen socially. Like, it doesn't have to just be, you know, taken off into space, which I would love, like, get us the fuck out. But, you know, that, and I don't have the answer for it, but using that manpower and more so that thinking power to actually do things and not have to always have this supplement income, just get paid to think, paid to create, you know, be able to sustain life by having an alternative form without it being like this one nation is communist, this one nation is democratic, you know? Having those micro social settings within each country or in set countries would be beneficial.
Sure.
Because you control people by giving them the most meager amount of money and sustenance to survive, just so they have enough energy to go to the next day to do the same thing.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how you control people.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, cogs in the wheel. You know, it's the same reason, like, you know, media gets used to blow up all these different, you know, social issues, and because it keeps keep people against black people, it keeps black people against brown people, it keeps us all in each other's throats, so that
against Democrats.
So we can't ever like come together to actually like see all the fucked up shit that's really going on in the world. But you know, and again, I mean, it's one of those things where it's almost like you're talking about with technology. Some of that stuff is in place. Yeah. So there's certain aspects of it that I can affect change, and there's certain aspects that I can't. So some of it I just accept and figure out how I can work within that system to then create my own little changes, rather than I think a lot of people just get pissed off, and then they just get addicted to being pissed off and talking about shit, but they're not really doing anything except falling into that system.
I fell into it.
So, yeah.
I fell into it. You were one of the ones that helped check that, because that whole thing about the consciousness inequality, there are times even internally, just yourself, that you are super connected and super dialed in. You're reading books, you're doing this, you're thinking, you're talking with people that don't just suit your own agenda, that you know you can rally with. You can block everybody on the feed that conflicts with your ideas, and you can just talk with the people who are like, yeah, fuck that guy. You know what I mean? And I fell into it. I totally bought into it, and I was aware that I was buying into it at the time I was. Yeah. You know, and
it's easy. I mean, we're inundated with it, and that's the thing. And I don't watch the news. Like, the only time I ever even hear the news is if, you know, my wife, you know, she deals with government policy and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes she just has to watch the news, or she has to see if, you know, some law that she's been, you know, lobbying on or working with is going to go through or not. But she knows I hate it. So when the news is on, I'm either out of the room, or she'll be like, honey, I just have to turn this on for 5 minutes, you know, because it's not that I want to be insulated from information. To me, I'm like, if something's really that important, I'm going to hear about it.
It's going to get to
somebody. Like, it's going to get to me. Yeah. It's not like I'm living under a rock. But I also don't think that there's any objective media outlets. Like, they're all, everybody, you know, whether they think they're, you know, progressive new age for mankind, everybody still, like, they're sharing news from their own perspective and their own agenda. So you watch
everything is a bias.
Like, every anchor, you know, they share stuff, and, you know, that's like what Anchorman was making fun of, was sort of like the death of real news to sort of like the creation of like entertainment news. And that's, you know,
entertainment.
And that's
Cronkite getting on there and ripping those dudes apart, tearing Sean Hannity apart and those guys. I love it. And he says it straight up. He's like, you made fun of us or whatever because we were like so bland. That's how it was supposed to be. And we were not supposed to be entertained by me. Right. I was supposed to give you direct information, period. Process. Like, we as kids, we were all like, news is so boring. And then later on, when you're listening to like the Fox soundtrack, it sounds like the goddamn Star Wars comeback. Right. Like, every exit is just, it speeds your heart up. Yeah. It gets you anxious. It gets you like hanging on that next thing just so they can bounce back to it. Tiger commercial.
Yeah, that's another. You know, it's funny. It's another reason that like there's so much like sickness and disease in this world is because the amount of stress that we're inundated with.
Yes.
You know, it's funny. So I I heard about this study they did where you know, so you know, our body, like we have a system like the sympathetic side and the parasympathetic side. Like one's decide to deal with stress, and then one's designed to help us recover from those stressors, right?
Okay.
So like now, because of like social media or the news, there's people that have the same physiological reactions to like a post that they see on Facebook. It triggers the same physiological reaction in their body as if they were running from a fucking lion for their lives. So the same types of hormones and all this stuff gets released, but whereas like our bodies are actually designed for that to happen rarely, right? Like every once in a while, you're either going to run from a lion for your life or you're going to fucking get disemboweled and you're dead.
Right.
But it wasn't like a daily thing, right? Well, now people are going through those physiological responses multiple times a day, you know?
So what happens with all of those
hit with all this stress? Yeah. So then
Right.
what it does is it starts to take all these receptors, like these hormone receptors in your body, and they're getting hit so often that it starts to down regulate, and then the body starts to get out of whack. And then, you know, it's just this whole cascade of events. And then you couple that with fucking the horrible nutrition that gets shoveled down our throats. And it's no wonder
Right.
that there's so much obesity, so much
Right.
sickness, so much mental disease. Like that's, you know, it's the thing, like that's with every step forward. Like if we're talking about technology, there's also a step back with something else. And that's the balance of nature. No matter how much mankind tries to destroy the balance of nature, it's going to balance out. And that's sort of the whole like yin and yang of life, right? And that's the thing, is that as many technological advances as we're making, it's almost like we're evolving in that aspect, but then we're like de-evolving in the aspect of actual human beings and
Right.
human contact, you know? And
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
yeah, it's
I
crazy.
physically felt that after I talked to you, and after, you know, after the election actually took place for about a week, I tuned out and I could feel a physical difference because it was like it was over. It's like when you get, for those of y'all that have had this experience, when you finally get sentenced, if you're in the judicial system and they're finally like, this is what you got to do, you're like, oh, okay. You know, it's that apprehension.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I got it. I did it.
Right.
I said I didn't, but I did. And that's kind of what it was too. So that's another way I'm looking to unwind. I'm exploring those. You know, I've done meditation in the past. I've worked out. I've tried exercise. I've eaten, and I love them all. I love that I don't consider myself having failed for any of them. You just move on. You go to the next thing. You find some other project. I did snowboarding for years.
Right.
You know, at the shop, we all went mountain biking, all of us. Every morning, the whole crew would go mountain biking before we go to work.
Right.
And I did wakeboarding, and I'm looking forward to that next outlet. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm even going to do a deprivation tank just because.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah.
They're cool.
And
yeah.
there's one here, like right around the corner from me. So I'm like, awesome. I'm going to go give it a shot just because, you know, I am sober now. And I don't regret anything about being sober. I love my whole life being sober. But the only one that ever creeps back into my head are the psychedelics, right? Where people are like, oh, it's not really a drug, but it is because it's a mental thing. And I've made this deal with the universe. But I enjoyed that time of introspection.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I enjoy that time of being cut off and isolated to just experience something. And everything I hear about the people that I pay attention to that talk about that, that's kind of where they go with it, that it was that time that they could just internally reflect.
Yeah.
So you've done it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do it fairly regularly. I mean, I've done up to 2 hours, you know.
Nice.
Usually I go for like an hour. I've done 2 hours. I actually, just to sidetrack from what you were saying, is that I've done some experimenting with like microdosing with psychedelics, right? Like psilocybin mushroom type stuff, but where you're taking a small enough dose that it triggers these electrical pathways in the brain, but it's not enough to trigger like a psychoactive response. So you're not taking enough to trip. I mean, I'm talking, you're taking like 0.1 to 0.2 grams. And what it really feels like is like a strong cup of coffee. But you know, there's actually like Johns Hopkins University has been doing research with psilocybin mushrooms for like 12 years, and they've been
for PTSD and for depression.
And they're starting to put forward a lot of information, and they're actually finding that when you take something, say like that's natural, like psilocybin mushrooms, or even, the ayahuasca is getting real big with people going down to South America and doing ayahuasca. They're finding that those compounds, part of the reason it's changing depression is because it's actually teaching the brain how to be more efficient at dealing with chemicals like serotonin. So it's creating, like, people are feeling happier because their brain's actually working more efficient with these chemicals. But they're also saying that what they think is that because it's causing these electrical impulses to fire through all stages of the brain, it's going in and it's almost like a defibrillator for somebody that has like a heart attack. They hit him with that defibrillator and it starts the heart up again.
Right.
Well, they're thinking that these electrical impulses that can be triggered from, some of these psychedelic plant medicines, if you want to call it that, just for the sake of what we're talking about, is these electrical impulses are actually waking up damaged parts of the brain that have been shut off.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting. So,
well, that makes a lot of sense to me, because my experience with LSD and microdots and mushrooms as a teenager, and and then later on in meditation, when I went through my rehabilitation thing, I used to go to this place called Vision Farms, which was this crazy facility where this little hippie guy had like gotten all this inheritance, and he meditated for like a week, and it said, you need to go to this town and you're going to find this place and you need to buy it. So he goes down to Citra, Florida, right outside of Ocala, and finds this epically beautiful house with one huge glass wall and like a little shed, like a gardener's shed that he lived in. And him and his wife bought this land and this house, and he became a yogi, and he had this library, which was every major religion's.
Was he stealing picnic baskets?
What's that? What's that?
Was he stealing picnic baskets?
Oh, yeah. So he did all of this shit, and he just made this facility where you could go and read, and there was silent days at this place, and like no meat could be eaten at the facility, so you could bring foods, but it had to be, plant-based, and there was animals on it. And it was incredible. And it was just this super high energy place where you could just go in and you would just have all this reading material with all of the major religions. And you kind of like would be able to see that it's all broken down to the same thing. It had these 7 children praying in the 7 major religions, prayer and garb. And all of them have the golden rule for that religion, which is do unto others as you would have done unto you, written in this different ways, but the same fucking message, right? It was just this place to like zone in. And the experiences I had there, meditating and just reading and contemplating and being cut off with no sound, were very similar to my psychedelic experiences. Sure. Granted, I didn't have the same visuals, but I had the same depth of mind. And why I believe that there's something to what you're talking about with releasing those damaged parts of the brain, I had two incidents in my life, 4 and 12, where a major traumatic incident took place. And when I was at this place meditating, at 2 different times, I physically, or as close to physical as you can in your mind, mentally went to myself at that age, looked at myself at that age, a 4-year-old kid, reached my hand out to that 4-year-old kid. The kid looked up at, well, I was the kid. I looked up at myself, took hand, became the adult self, and left the space.
Sure.
Crazy experience. And I did the same thing again in a briefer experience when I was 12. So it was like I was able to track back into those moments in my time where something traumatic had happened. When trauma happens, your mind at a subconscious level tries to make sense of what took place, and as a child usually blames self and locks down into that time, into that space as a defense mechanism. So that part is always in you. That's the trauma of childhood, right? You have those times where you're cornered. And by going back into those and pulling myself back out, I released them. I let go of the shit that happened to me that I was aware that they were bad things, but I didn't have the experience of removing myself from it. And that's what I've heard about the PTSD and the people, especially the soldiers, is like they have that experience and they're able to look at that traumatic event in just a different way. They're able to release it. Yeah. And they're able to just, somebody guides them through it and they have their experience and they come out of it at the other end and they're like, right, that thing happened because bad thing happens and it wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
And I think go ahead.
It's funny what you're talking about is actually very similar to, there's a psychotherapy approach called IFS, internal family systems. And it's kind of a newer, it's been around, 20, 25 years, I think, kind of more mainstream. that, you know, but it's this approach where, you know, and I've done it myself, and I've done it with, you know, some clients where we've kind of worked through some of these aspects, but it's kind of going back and looking at sort of like your psyche as not so much like multiple personalities, but still sort of like understanding that there are different aspects to your personality, and then treating those personalities as entities. And so
Right.
being able to go back and address them is understanding, like, let's say if somebody has anger issues, you know, you really start to look at like, what are the triggers? And then that anger aspect is just, it's a defensive mechanism. Right.
Right.
And so then it's sort of like developing a relationship with that defensive mechanism, that defensive entity inside of you, and then kind of starting to peel back the layers to figuring out where it was in your life, like what traumatic experiences triggered that to sort of like become cultivated in your life, and
Right.
and then understanding how to let it go, because that's the thing, is a lot of people have these defense mechanisms that they don't need anymore. And
Right.
so going through this process of almost like developing a positive relationship, because what happens when people get angry, right? They're like, afterwards, they're like, oh, fuck, I hate that I get upset.
Right.
Rather than understanding that anger has a part, like it's not a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing that's designed to protect you from something. It just doesn't always come through in the right way. So yeah, I mean, you know, part of it is being able to go back and like make peace with your past and understand where, like, you know, you might have this defense mechanism that came up because you got bullied when you're 6 years old, and then it's stuck with you, and all of a sudden you're 40 and you're like, well, fuck, I don't need, like, that part's not necessary in my life anymore. Like, I don't need that anger side of me. Like, I understand now that other people's actions are their own, and it's not something that really affects me, or, you know, like, I don't have to get insecure or upset when somebody says something negative to me, because I understand that's just their opinion, and their words have no power over my life unless I actually give them that power.
Mhm.
You know, so it's being able to go back and you know, like I said, looking at those parts as sort of like entities. And so it's just interesting that you had that experience, because it almost sounds exactly like how like IFS therapists would walk you through like a scenario that way. But you know, it's pretty cool. Like it's you know, I think there's a lot of power in that.
I think so too. And I think that, you know, reevaluation and self-evaluation is super important. And I'm glad to see that one of the breakdowns that's happening is with like this ultra masculine, like perception that any sort of counseling, any sort of, I need any kind of help or anything like that could be taken as bad. You know, the one thing I learned from my childhood, which was varied, I had some amazing family members and some amazing times, like very, very fortunate to have parts of the life I had. And then I had the other side, you know, the things that do happen in life and that do happen with childhood. And by going through what I went through, I always knew that whenever I were to have kids, and I haven't had kids yet, and part of it is because of my past. I've told you that. It's hard to go have kids sometimes when you're like not sure if the things that were hereditary are with you as well. And
Right.
people would always be like, yeah, but you're aware of it, and that in itself will stop it. And you're like, you're not totally sure. But reevaluation is extremely important. And if you have kids, I know if I had kids, I will go to counseling, regularly check in to make sure I don't slip into what I experienced.
Yeah.
Because I don't think my mom or whoever else was like, you know, I'm going to be fucking crazy and I'm going to make sure to like really affect this kid in a way. I don't think that was the goal. I don't think
Right.
that was anybody's intent.
Sure.
And I think it just comes out, it catches up. And learning more about my grandfather and what he was later in life, like I was able to really quickly be like, no wonder my mom was like that. Like that
Right.
guy was fucking crazy. It was passed down. Right.
Right.
And so I hope for that culturally. With these things. I mean, even these type of conversations we're able to have, and if this does reach out to anybody else and it benefits them, I mean, that's that energy you have to put out, right?
Sure.
Before, how could you possibly be on a screen? You would have been in makeup. You would have had you would have had, you know, you would have been famous. Right. You know, and you could only get out what you could get out. But this type of interaction socially, collectively, independently, like with what you're offering. I mean, that's something I hope more and more and more people embrace. And not for nothing, like you're kind of considered, you know, you have a reputation as kind of a badass, and that's good. It's good that people that are perceived in a certain way, especially in this like uber masculine way, also embrace that interconnection, that personal evaluation, that reach out to other people.
Yeah, well, it's balance, right? And that's like one of the big things like that I've realized in my life is, you know, like I joke all the time, like, you know, I do goofy shit or, you know, like nerdy things. And I always joke like, hey man, you got to have some like nerdiness to balance out all this.
Sometimes you got to choke out a blue haired dude in the middle of the lobby of a tattoo expo because he dares you.
We can get to that story later. But I mean, but that's the thing, like part of it with me, I'll tell you this, like one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the last handful of years is there's a lot of power in vulnerability, you know, like for years, you know, I still, you know, I'm getting ready to turn 41 and I grew up still, our generation was like, boys don't cry, you know, you got to be a man, you fucking fall down, you get up, you rub some fucking dirt on it. And you know, there's something to toughness, but when it's just sort of like this projected toughness, like, is that really beneficial, you know? And like, you know, my wife and I talk about it. And one of the things that I love about my wife is that like, I can have days where I'm, you know, struggling, or I feel like, you know, something's creeping in and being real heavy on me. And I can just go and I can just let my wife, I can just let it go to my wife. I can just, it doesn't matter what's going on. She could start talking. I'll be like, hey, I just need you to kind of be here for me and just like, let me say what I have to say. And then just, you know, fuck, sometimes I just want her to hold me. You know what I mean? I got to say what I got to say. Like, you know, might fucking cry. It doesn't happen often, but, you know, whatever, like there's power in vulnerability because then you release all this sort of like negative tension that's inside you. And I think part of that is that balance. So even as much time as I spend in the gym or I spend in jiu-jitsu or my fighting experience and all that, like as much toughness is there, I understand like, that's not who I am. That's not the persona that I'm trying to get across. A lot of that is just me and how I'm trying to take care of my body. And then there's the balance side of it as well. Like I have to cultivate also, whether you want to call it the masculine and the feminine, whatever it is, like you have to cultivate both sides to have balance. And if you don't have that, like you can try to just be this hard ass all the time that you want, but you know, you ask a lot of people, how's that going to work out for you? Like if you see people that are 40 years old and they're still fighting in bars, like how many times they've been to jail, how many friendships have they ruined? Like how many fucking, you know, it's just, you know, and then the other side, if you have people that are scared to ever say what they have to say, there's no balance in their life either. So it's being able to work that, you know.
And what's interesting about that perception, you know, we're a very Hollywood driven society, especially in the younger generations, when you still had like our generation, you could still be a celebrity and nobody was like calling you out on your personal life. So that those people were celebrity, right? They say there'll never be another true celebrity because like Madonna, until like people started putting out her like workout routine and that she looked, you know, bad in their opinion for a 60-year-old woman back, you know, when we were kids, like you were just famous, you know what I mean? John Wayne was always just John Wayne. There was nothing else to it. Right. It kind of carried on. Even then the cowboy effect, say if it was something like from Billy the Kid to a John Wayne to whatever, even the hardest dudes, it was their vulnerability that made them connect. Sure. You know what I mean? It was the Godfather like crying that he had to kill his brother. You know what I mean? Right. So even though we saw that example, it didn't really pass down, right? You just kind of kept that machismo up and you kept that wall and that defense, you know? So like I said, man, I don't think there's anything better than that. I think that without being well-rounded, you pass on the worst example to children, to the next generation, giving them this idea that like you have to fit into this mold and you never like explore anything because that's what you experienced, you know? I think it's great, man. I think it's the right way to go with it. I'm excited to see where you take it. I'm excited to, you know, continue to be, you know, your friend and to get into these conversations from time to time. There's a ton more topics that I'd love to go over with you. Sure. And hopefully we can do this again and really go into them. In the meantime, do you want to give everybody that's listening or may not be listening a link to where they can contact you or follow you or?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the easiest way to contact me for, you know, most stuff, if you want to buy a tattoo machine, it's just, I have a website, joshfordmachines.com. Pretty simple. My Instagram is joshford13, like the numbers 13. And, for the nutrition and strength conditioning stuff right now, I just have people contact me through joshfordperformance@gmail.com. I'm in the process of getting the website done and all that for my facility. So once that's up and running, I'll actually have a link for that. But, that's kind of
Cool. Send it over to me, because the cool thing with the podcast is like JP, you're watching this right now, JP, can go drop that in. So anything you want at the end of this, we can throw up into there so people can reach out to you and follow your social media. Yeah, it'll just bloop, bloop.
Good old technology.
Yeah, technology.
Yeah, it's if anybody just wants to talk about stuff and they feel like they can't talk about it with a fucking regular therapist, because I know that's like you were talking about, checking into therapy. Like you said, I think therapy is great, whether it's with a therapist or a life coach or just talking shit with your friends. But it's being able to find that person that's going to be able to actually give you some therapy, somebody that's going to be honest with you,
right? Somebody
that you can connect with. Like I said, when I went to that one therapist and he was just this older dude that he was like shocked. I think, 90% of the time we were together, he was probably still staring at my chin like, I can't believe this fucking guy's face is tattooed. What am I going to get out of that interaction?
Right.
Like everything that guy told me just kind of rolled off as like, fuck you,
But that falls back into your idea about the tribe being gone. Like there's not young men, middle-aged men, and old men getting in a tent at the end of the day and just talking shit out. Yeah. And like having a circle and the youth listening to the wisdom of the elder. You know what I mean? Like that, if you know any people in your life that are twice your age or 20 years older than you, whatever, talk to them. There is nothing better than my experience with family friends that were older. And in our industry, the Bowery Stan Moskowitz conversations, the Philadelphia Eddie conversations, the Doc Dogs, all of those were where I learned really what the old days were like, and this myth that it used to be more art driven. No, it wasn't. It was about getting money, getting Cadillacs, getting girls. Like it was a hustle. And their perspective on things is so much more casual. I mean, a couple of them still get worked up, but their overall experience is just something you can't get from people younger, because younger people are still trying to figure it out. We're all still trying to figure it out. Yeah. If you don't talk to people your senior and get that, that's a huge loss for us. And I think that's what we lost in the tribal aspect. Yeah. So your alternative to that is to reach out to people that are intentionally seeking wisdom and connect with you. Right. And if it's somebody like Josh, or if it's somebody else in your life that you feel like you'd benefit, talking to them and learning from, get it out. Because there's a lot of people that suffer unnecessarily, and a lot of lives are cut short totally unnecessarily in our industry as well, by people just never getting that out and trying to live up to some crazy manufactured idea of how they should act and what they should and shouldn't talk about.
Yeah, wearing the uniform. Yeah, well, like you said, I think part of it is I think people understand, like, okay, let's say you want to get into tattooing, right? People know that there's a benefit of having a mentor. Right. You go to somebody that has experience because you're going to learn from their experience and it's going to help you. But how many people do that in life, and that's part of it. Like, I'll tell you, like, I have a Rolfing therapist that I went to, which if you don't know what Rolfing is, it's sort of the easiest way to describe it is it's like chiropractic for your muscles. So it works more Rolfing, Rolfing. So it's like a soft tissue manipulation. So it's sort of like a specialized kind of massage, but rather than just working with the muscles, they focus on the fascia, which is like the connective tissue that kind of keeps the muscles and the bones all connected. So, if you cut through a steak or something and you see all that white webbing, that's not necessarily just fat. A lot of that's fascia, right? Okay. So, but anyway, so I went to this Rolfing therapist, and it turned out he's been doing it for, almost 20 years, but he's retired. I think he's 72. The guy's name is Ray Allen. And he's like, for me, like I love this dude like he's my grandfather. But we have great conversations. I've been going to him for about a year and a half, like once or twice a month. And half the reason I still go to this guy is that, there's the benefits of what I get out of the body work, but the conversations that him and I have, we have 75-minute sessions. And sometimes we actually will, go to grab coffee before, have lunch after, and we just talk. And so he's retired, but he's the former president of MICA, which is the big art college in Baltimore. But at one point, this guy was also the president of like the National Association of like art colleges. So whatever the big association that overlooks all of the art colleges, what they're all tied into, he was the president of for a while, and he still sits on the board for like some art colleges in France and things like that. But he, before he got into the administrative side, he was a professor with like advanced oil painting and color theory. And it's cool because him and I have sat down and talked about some of his ideas with color theory, and it's shit way beyond anything I've ever read in a book.
Right.
But he's just a really cool guy, you know, and he's, you know, he came from like that whole 60s, 70s era, you know, so he went through the whole like Timothy Leary, and he was into art. So, you know, he went through this whole like mind expansion stuff. So him and I have discussions with that. But I always ask him, you know, like, you know, hey, do you have any books that you suggest reading, or, you know, like what's going on in your life? And we've gotten to the point now where, you know, we talk like family, like, hey, you know, what's going on with your life? What's going on with your life? But it's also been cool that I feel like I've been able to contribute to him as well. Like there's things that I'll present to him that he's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. But to me, like, he's a mentor in life. Right. Like he's somebody that like, I like the way that he lives his life. Like he retired from, you know, working with the art college, and then he, you know, found this calling with Rolfing. And so he helps people be healthier and be more positive. And he's one of those guys that like, you get done with being around him and you just feel like your day's better, you know, right. Because he's just this very calming influence. And so I like that. And him and I have, you know, we've sort of found that we have very similar parallels, that I'm kind of like a younger version of him, but even he like, you know, comments and compliments me saying that like, I've figured out some of these things faster than he did. So like things that he figured out in his 50s, I always, you know, figured out 10 years earlier. So it's fun being able to kind of to bounce that stuff off. And so that's what I think people are missing out on is
absolutely
have mentors in life, because a lot of our parents aren't like that.
No. And how many people that you look up to when you read their autobiographies and, you know, their accomplishments, they immediately start talking about their mentor.
Right.
Like that's one of the first things they do. And it wasn't just an apprentice. It wasn't a carpenter to a carpenter.
Yeah.
It was just somebody that they connected with. And some people had many.
Yeah.
And that, just like with how charity is being lost, mentorship is being lost as a trait.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about, you know, I really enjoyed when I did the counseling at the youth centers in Orlando, right. For the juvenile detention centers and all of that. With that whole premise of can't keep it unless you give it away. Like, I know I need to do this. I know that there are things I need to do in my immediate community, whether it's, you know, hosting more NA and AA meetings, right. or whether it's just popping in at the youth center, or just sitting out at the park right in the corner of my block with all these, like, what I perceive as dipshit kids, and like being present, you know what I mean? Yeah. And having conversations and seeing what everybody's up to. Because like when it's not just kids raising kids and they get lost doing that. It's adults at any age group. If we fall into this like alpha situation, whether or not we are alpha, where we just like are like, okay, this is me. I've got to make it in this world. I've got to, you know, that whole self-made bullshit that like isn't real. Like there is no such thing, in my opinion, as self-made. Everything is an interconnection of everybody else, you know.
Sure.
And everything that you do is that way. But I see more and more clearly, because I'm on the path of seeing more and more clearly how relevant those things are, and having those type of conversations, like what you're experiencing right now and what you're trying to pass forward. It doesn't have to be the same thing. Not everybody has to go out to be a life coach, but by all means, talk to somebody older and talk to somebody younger. Sure. One of the things I've been saying my whole life was always a teacher, always a student.
Yeah.
And you got it.
Always having somebody that you're on the level with. And that's the same, like, it's the same thing right. I tell guys in jiu-jitsu. And one of my favorite things about jiu-jitsu is it sort of is this, because it is a very like intellectual martial art. So you have the thinking side and the physical side, but it's, and it's such a lengthy journey. Like on average for somebody to get their black belt with jiu-jitsu, it's 10 years, man. There's a lot you can learn about yourself in 10 years, especially when you're having to go through years and years of like asking somebody to say, you know, to like give you your life, you know, you're asking every time you tap, you're basically asking for mercy from another human being. So it makes you have to really come to grips with your ego.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at that.
But it is. And you know, one of the things I tell people is like, you like to really thrive is you need to have somebody that you look up to that you can learn from. You need to have people that are on your level that you can test yourself with. And then you need to have people below you that you can share your information with. So it creates this whole, again, goes back to balance, but it creates this whole cycle of learning and passing on and learning and passing on. And you kind of said it earlier, but just to touch on it again, is that I feel like one of my greatest learning tools is teaching, because just like you said, is that for me to teach something, I have to break it down in a way that people are going to understand it. And especially when I'm coaching groups, sometimes I have to explain it 10 different ways so 10 different people can get it. So it really makes me break down all these different fundamentals, these different aspects and these different concepts. And then it reinforces with me, or it even teaches me something that I hadn't thought about or that I had forgotten about because it had just become automatic. You know, so if you're just one of those people that you always want to like find people you can take from, but you're not really giving it away. Like to me, you know, again, I think you said it earlier, but one of the things I like to say is that like, what's the point of knowledge if you can't pass it on? Like if you just learn something and then you die with it, you might as well not ever fucking learn, because it just disappeared, you know? But,
absolutely.
You know, if you're just always looking to people for like, what can you get? What can you get? What can you get? What can you get? And never giving anything back. Like you're never actually going to learn the lessons to take what that person has given you and make it your own. At that point, you're just going to be, if you're always taking from people and never sharing it, you're never going to fully process it. And you're always going to be a second-rate version of that person that's teaching it to you. Whereas if you take that information, you put it to use with those people that are on the same level with you, and you kind of figure it out that way, and then you break it down and you share it with people below you, that's how you can take that information and you can understand it on a conceptual level. You can make it your own, and then you pass it on. And to me, that's what true knowledge is about. It's not just about like copying what somebody teaches you. It's taking what that person's taught you, questioning it enough that you can actually break it down and understand it, so that you can then pass it on properly, rather than just regurgitating something that somebody told you or something that you read, you know? And that's the same thing with life. Like what I like about jiu-jitsu is it's a way to break it down to some of my students that haven't thought about it in life, but it's the same way. That's the thing, is I feel like our generation of parents didn't really have great examples. So they didn't understand how to really be mentors to us. Not in general. Some people had great parents.
Sure.
I think my parents, you know, have turned into good parents, but it wasn't until after I was actually out of my childhood. And I think some of that has come from me actually being direct with them and challenging them to actually change and see how they needed to be better in their lives. You know, some people that don't have those good role models, they need to seek out those good role models and then learn from them. And then again, like question it, you know, like be an open-minded skeptic is one of the other things, is that I don't care how good the information is somebody's sharing with me, I'm always going to fucking question it. And I'm not going to question it to be like this defiant child. I'm going to question it because I want to understand it. Like I want to understand it to the bone. I don't want to just take it for that illusionary belief system that gets sold to most people. You know, that's why I have a hard time with a lot of religion, is because you know, you can't, like, not to piss off anybody that's religious, but like, you know, I remember the last time I went and sat in a church, you know, I'm listening to the minister say this stuff, and a lot of it was just like regurgitation out of, you know, the Bible that he was reading or things that he had heard. And I'm looking around, all these people are just like wide-eyed and ready to accept it without questioning, because it made them feel comfortable. It just gave them this little safe place for them to live. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is that questioning sometimes isn't the most comfortable place, but it's really where growth happens. You know, we even joke in my house, like my wife and I are always like #get uncomfortable, right? Because that's where like some of our biggest jumps in our relationship, in our communication, has been getting into that zone where it's not comfortable. We're talking about stuff that makes us sort of like cringe a little bit, but then you get kind of comfortable talking through it. You get it on the table, and then it allows you to kind of move forward. And, you know, like to me, that's sort of like how evolution happens. I mean, that's why evolution happens, right? You get an organism that changes. It doesn't change because everything's like copacetic. It changes because these challenges are hitting it, and it has to change to be able to thrive and live. And so, you know, that's part of it, man, is if people aren't willing to question things, and they're not willing to get uncomfortable, they're sort of just going to be stuck in like this illusionary belief. And then if that belief system that they've bought into gets really challenged, then they crumble, you know, because they don't actually understand the foundation of what they've been standing on. So yeah, sorry, that was a little bit of a side rant, but
no, that's exactly, everybody, why I brought Josh on, and why I'm grateful that we have been friends as long as we have, because we've been through all kinds of crazy stages and highs and lows and over again.
Right.
And I think we talked about that early on in our friendship, that any relationship or friendship that hasn't been challenged isn't anything. If
Sure.
you've only smiled and laughed with somebody, you don't know that person.
Yeah.
I don't buy it. Like,
Yeah.
I've not got one family member, not one friend, not one, my current amazing girlfriend that has not had those challenges. So I'm super grateful. I hope that we can do this repetitively, because there are so many topics that come up that I feel like this is really relevant for. I could think of a couple of cool people that we could maybe get on a little bit of a group session on here.
Sure.
And because I really want to do that as well. I want to have some fundamentalists in different areas on here to, like you said, not to challenge it for the sake of being an asshole. I will argue the same point on both sides with two different people, just to make sure I believe what I think I believe. Right. And I've come out of the other side of it before, having argued against my original position and been like, turns out I didn't really get that, or I was able to adapt to it. Right. So I think that this is an amazing place to wrap this up, man. And I've been a pleasure. I hope you come back.
Yeah, thanks.
Again, I'm Chris Collins. You are Josh Ford, and this has been The Other Side of the Tattoo.